to an 85. And I expect after the next team project, the class average will probably go up somewhere around an 87, which is what I want to do to bring in as high as I can for the final exam, because I know what happens, right? It's worth 30%, and so you need a little bit of give and take. Extra credits, if you're going to do them, you got to get them in by the deadlines, please. But that's up to you. Remember the chapter outlines. If you do it, it's a bonus, but if you don't do it, there's no negative impact to your grade, okay? And I understand you guys got a lot going on. We'll do the course evaluations at our last class, and the students that are watching this asynchronously, we will make sure I contact you, because I always get into trouble since I don't take attendance, and generally my response rate is not what they want. And so please help me out, not with necessarily how you rate me, but more importantly, I just need responses, okay? But I do like the feedback. Again, housekeeping, because we're getting close to the final exam. What I promise I will do for the final exam is I can't do a practice, but I'll post a non-graded quiz that you can take. The other thing that I promised you day one of the class, and I've reiterated it a couple of times, I don't care what your final grade is, right? You were in my class, now you're part of what I consider, I'm Italian, so you're part of my IS-223 student employment family. And I've been here teaching since 2014, but with BU since 2007. So if you need a recommendation for study abroad, internship, you need help with LinkedIn, right? Once you're in my class, you always can ask me for help going forward. So never hesitate. If you end up with a B, you end up with a B. It's not the grade, right? It's what you've learned and how we built your resume. And many of you are really good at applying, but maybe not necessarily the best test taker. But I can always come up with something positive. I think I've gotten to know many of you, and I will help you out as much as I can. So that was the promise day one, and I carry it through to the end, okay? So this is our last lecture. I promise you, no corny music. I did try to come up with something though. I wanted a holiday cartoon that was non-secular, non-religious, you know, didn't refer to Christmas, didn't refer to, you know, to the birth and all this other stuff, right? I couldn't find one, so you're stuck with me. Okay. So, information security. I tell you, this is one of the hottest fields right now, and it's not going to stop, right? It's a growth area. You don't have to be super technical in order to get into this field. If you are technical, that's great, like a minor in computer science or a major. But risk assessment is huge. Every single one of the big four have a risk assessment wing, and they do cybersecurity audits. And I'm going to show you one that was done on me, so you get a sense. It is a great and growing field. And just to give you an example, this came in my email today, right? So I get constant announcements. December 1st, Baltimore Country Public Schools closed due to ransomware attack. So ransomware attack, right? They were able to encrypt the server that stored all of their data. And in order for the Baltimore school system to get it, access to it, they either had to pay ransom or to forego. That happened and reported today, right? There's a growth industry, which I found interesting. So now there's, you know, this growth in insurance, right? So that you can actually pay the ransom if needed, and you have an insurance premium. There's a growth industry there, right? For those of you that follow soccer, Manchester United got cyber attacked, and again, it's a ransomware. Their data is now locked, and they don't have access, right? And we'll talk about a potential way to avoid that if it's data that's not like, with social security numbers or, credit cards or personal information. There is a way in which you can restore and not pay the ransom, right? This also was a headline this morning: why vulnerable code is shipped knowingly. It's sloppy, right? It's speed to market. We talked about agile, right? In which you release sprints, right? But you want to make sure that it's well tested. At least we have alpha, we have unit alpha, and then we have beta, right? You want to do some beta testing. But now companies are quickly releasing things, and there's flaws, right? We're humans, and there's flaws. This came in as well. It's a webinar. And again, if any of you are interested, not now because you got too much going on, but over the break or next semester or the summer if you don't get an internship, if you want some help with additional trails, additional certifications, or some of these webinars that you can add to your resume because you build knowledge, this is pretty good. But I kind of found this one interesting because it brings together some of what we talked about in chapter 6, right? Machine learning modules to enhance threat detection, right? So based on patterns, they're predicting, right? Or analyzing a potential threat. That's pretty cool. Blockchain analysis to identify criminal activity, right? So a lot of times you get spoofed and that IP address, it doesn't really exist, right? It's a relay. And so it's hard to trace. But if they employ blockchain technology, they might be able to get to the original source, right? Cloud and mobility safeguards protect the end-to-end supply chain. So now not only are they attacking servers, and so either a denial of service attack or ransom, right? They're destroying the logistics supply chain. Why? We're in a pandemic. And if they can free up some of these goods and services and put them on the black market, they can make quite a bit of money. And then if you think about it, it gets worse, right? For arms, ammunition, those type of things. The governance models, to me, that's more like, business side, but it's the formation of policies, procedures, and steering committees. So I thought that was interesting. And again, if you have questions, ask. Then I told you on a weekly basis, and sometimes even more than that, I get bulletins from the Department of Homeland Security, and it lists all of the flaws, and they rate them as high, medium, and low, right? So it's software, firmware, it could be, a hardware issue, those type of things, right? This came in, it's for last week, but it's dated November 30th, so it's the week in review. And, oops. Wow. So what I have to do with my staff is we quickly go through this and kind of wrote a script that compares our software with what's in the bulletin to flag what we need to immediately address. Because when I'm audited, they want to make sure that I'm up to date with patches, upgrades, right? Anything that closes some of the holes. And the list just goes on and on. So I thought that was interesting to share, right? So this is a growing field. It's an interesting field. You can do it from the risk assessment or more technical, which would be like forensics. Rapid7 is a local firm, and the president of the company is a BU grad. They do internships and hires. It's a great area. Okay, enough of that. So again, we talked about this in the first class, right? Everything's connected, and so there's lots of vulnerabilities. You have software, you have the internet, you have people, right? And if I have financial data that's compromised, right, that's a pretty big to-do, whether it's my own financial information as a company or my financial data that I've captured on my customers. We talked about earlier this semester how BAUD, which is the alumni system for BU, sent out bulletins to everybody because the data was breached. And you're like, well, I'm not even an alumni yet. No, as soon as you enter BU, you're registered. Why? Because they're going to hound you for money, right? But that's your BU ID and some student information. And so I told you I had kind of an interesting little twist for me where I got approved for unemployment to my house, but I'm clearly employed, right? So somebody took on my identity when that data was breached. And then if you think about financial is one thing, but if it's my company's secrets, right, and it's ransomed, that could put me out of business, right? It's my logic. Again, just glance over these. You should know them as business students, right? What are some of the rules and regulations, HIPAAs for medical? And it extends not just for protecting patient care information, you also have to separate it from your financial and administrative systems. So I mentioned to you before, we have faculty here that do research in this arena, right? We have a fairly large health sector in the graduate program, so we have faculty that do research. The data that we subscribe to for them has to be on isolated equipment and has to have additional firewalls and protection because it's governed under HIPAA. And if we're breached, we have to report to the federal government, right? The Graham-Leach-Biley Act, this is the financial institutions. So that's why BAUD had to, or the alumni system had to communicate to all of us that our data was breached because it falls under this particular act because it's a financial product, right? And then Sarbanes-Oxley, it's, again, if you're doing a risk assessment, you're looking at a series of controls and safeguards in place to secure the firm. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the next couple of slides. Any questions on these? Okay. So, controls, right? Not a big deal. You have policies and procedures in place to safeguard. Some of them can be, written statements, objectives, and others can be, more automated. So you have to have general controls. Here at BU, we have a series of controls. You all are governed under the acceptable use policy, right? You can only use your PC, the internet, right, to do certain things. Some things are completely prohibited, like, ripping off a movie, ripping off a song, connecting to the black or the dark net, right? Most other things you can do within reason. You also can't use it to perpetuate a hate crime or bullying and those type of things. That's governed under our policy, right? It's an acceptable use policy. Application controls, we kind of talked about those, right? So it's really the quality assurance. You really want to make sure that production, meaning in-use systems, are separated from, your fixes ready to be deployed. And so you have a test server and you run your application or your program code through your test server to make sure that there's no break. And then another team moves it into use, right? And the larger shops have more people doing it. In my particular group, I was systems management. I have some application programmers. And you don't want your application programmers to move anything into production. You want somebody else to do it, right? That would be an example of an application control. You know, I've used the term risk assessment. You clearly do that in the finance side, but we do it in this side, right? It's probability of threat. Employees are the number one, like, weakness, right? But I found this was kind of interesting, right? A power failure, if you don't have a disaster recovery or a business continuity plan, it's a significant loss per event. Who knows the difference between disaster recovery and business continuity? Okay, so disaster recovery, and this is on the test. Disaster recovery is hardware failure. So we're at 595 Commonwealth. I have a server room. That server room, excuse me, loses power. It gets flooded because we're in the garage, right? How am I going to quickly address restoring those services? So I have Amazon 3 that I've mentioned. I have backup copies, and I take that throughout the day of questrom tools and other stuff. So if I lose the connection from the server room, within minutes, I can point you to an alternative site, and you'll only see a blip for a second or two, right? That's a disaster recovery plan, and I'll show you my plan in a minute. Business continuity means BU is out of commission. We've lost the complete 111 Cummington data center. It's been destroyed, right? Fire. How do we now keep BU up and running? And what's the plan of attack? And it changes, and has to be written, by the way, based on the time of year. If this is February, then probably the most critical system is the response to prospective candidates, right? Because that's revenue. And so it would have a SWAT team, right, a commander, in charge of keeping that business function up and running. And what else is needed? I need some office staff, I need some computers, I need a location. So business continuity is how do you keep the critical functions of your business operating when you've lost a part of your enterprise? It could be a building or it could be a technology. Is that clear? Okay. We talked about acceptable use policy. Identity management, you guys know this because you're now using two-factor authentication, right? In some of your apps here at BU, right? Aren't you? Yes. So it's how do you authorize and identify acceptable authorized users, right? And we've indicated before that we're using the Kerberos, right? And it's in some cases we use two-factor. And when I use Kerberos for anything new, right? What am I using? What's it called? When I build that Kerberos module into the new software, I make it talk together. It's 3 initials.
API.
Excuse me?
API.
Yes. Right? It's an automated program interface, right? It allows software to talk to each other, right? And it's also, in this particular case, part of a service-oriented architecture, meaning it's best practice. It's in a library, and I can reuse it anytime we bring in new software, right? So API allows them to talk together. Service-oriented architecture is kind of like the framework. It's a philosophy that allows products to work together. We talked a little bit, about disaster recovery. So it's plans for restoration, right, of service interruptions, right? Generally, it's a hardware failure or a power failure. So when I first came to BU, we were on street power in 595 Commonwealth, my server room. And anytime there was like, you know, a summer high usage, right, we were getting issues. And so I'm like, oh, come on. You know, I work for government, we're a little further advanced than this. So we need a UPS, right, to condition the power, an uninterruptible battery supply, right? But that only gives me about 30 minutes. Allows me, if I'm on campus, to safely shut down servers so they don't crash. If I'm off campus, right, again, you think about the era, it's 2007, kind of tough to log into all these systems manually, right, because we had 30 plus to shut them down. And so I advocated for a backup generator. So you get regular power, you get interruptions, it goes to UPS. If it exceeds 8 to 12 minutes, automatically it's switched over to a backup generator. So I never have an issue with software or hardware going down, right? And that's now part of our plan. Many parts of BU still does not have a backup generator. Part of it is where we're located, because you either have to do it in the back of the building or on top of the roof. If you have all these old buildings, some of them can't sustain that weight, right? But you need a backup generator. Business continuity plans. I'm actually going to show you my plan. I'm going to do a new screen share. Am I missing anything in chat? So I open these files. Sorry. So, again, I'm kind of old school, and I was an IT auditor, and so I knew we needed a business continuity plan. But to be very honest with you, IT shouldn't be the driver. We're a critical function, but we're part of the whole business. So it's how does Questrom continue to deliver what it's delivering, which is, you know, classroom teaching, research, pay people, those type of things, right? And obviously the systems support it, so we don't drive it. But my section of the continuity plan, I had to update based on the pandemic, right? And so the key here for BU is what happens if the disruption, meaning we're remote or we lose connection for greater than 4 weeks. So that was kind of like the assumption. First off, I have to list a table of organization, and I have to indicate who is next in line to take over for me should I be unable to do the job, I'm sick or whatever the case may be, right? So I've named 2 people on my team to take over, and I would always make sure that we're not in the same area together, right? So I had to list a table of organization. This happens to be my organization. So it's Steve, Chen, and Carla. I then have to describe, you know, kind of what's my critical applications and how I'm going to respond. And then where is my backup documentation should there be a fire or a building issue, right? So that's kind of what this says. This is, again, acting executive director, so I name in order. And then, there's a bunch of stuff here. And then, from page 11 to page 23, I have to list every single product and what it's running on and how it's backed up and what its criticality is. So, you know, everything here is listed, and blue is automatically backed up, and so it would be immediately restored. Some of the other applications are less critical, and so they have a, 24 or 48-hour restoration, so they would be down for use. But I have to list everything, including who has permissions to it. It could be not just my staff, but the user base, right? So I go through everything, page on page. And again, I'm only a small part of BU, right? We're a college within the university. So we use many of the systems that are corporate, like Google Apps or Exchange for email, right? We don't use Blackboard, we have our own LMS. We use central ERP, central HR, central everything, right? So all of that is part of their plan. This is just ours. So the BU plan, if mine is 12 pages, exceeds 100 pages. Because there's lots of software, lots of servers, lots of research, as well as teaching. So anyways, I have to update this at least twice a year. And you can see in here, I list the host name. This is the IP address. And so if need be, we can create a diversion to get to that resource if that resource is not available. I'm audited against this too. So twice a year, I have to do a business continuity test. And I have to show my results to internal audit here at BU. Right? And so if you were doing risk assessment, you'd be working with clients to develop a disaster recovery plan or a business continuity plan, and then you'd also be looking at whether they're compliant or not. I don't know if there's any questions on this, but this is real life. Okay. So again, best practice means you have both in place. Most companies will have a disaster recovery, but they don't have a business continuity plan. And that's dangerous. When in Y2K, the change of the century, it became really clear that you need to have a business continuity plan. What happens if your sourcing system is out of commission? How do you get goods and services delivered? And think about, like here at BU, if our sourcing system is out, that means they can't order food, toilet paper, critical things that are needed, right? You guys aren't going to be too happy, right? And so they have to have an alternative way to get those goods and services here. That's what a business continuity plan does. Okay. Auditing always likes to tell you that they're your friends. Well, we work for the same organization, so I will say, yeah, okay, I have a beer with them. But their whole role is to find areas for improvement, right? So you never get a report that doesn't have some sort of issue or flaws that need to be improved on. And I'll show you a real report that was issued for me. And you kind of go through like critical down to low. and you usually need to respond with an action plan of when it's going to be corrected, and then you're audited again to prove that you did what you said you're going to do, right? So this is an example from the book of an actual audit plan, right? So weaknesses over here, kind of what they're looking for. So they audited an application, and let's call it Salesforce, and they found that users had left the organization, but their account was still active. That's a critical issue, right? One, it's a cost issue because you're paying for a license, but two, now you potentially have unauthorized people still gaining access, right? Generally here at BU, people leave on good terms, but sometimes, an employee you dismiss, you terminate. You want to make sure that their account is completely expired, right? If it's tied into Kerberos, it's a little bit easy because you can break it at the Kerberos and then get to it at the system level to actually change the license count, but not everything is yet integrated with Kerberos or two-factor authentication. Network configured to allow some sharing of files, right? Well, we've talked about this one. So I'm in software, and I deal with software vendors. If I used email to exchange software back and forth, right? That means it's open for anybody to send me an executable, right? Which could be then downloaded not just to my computer, which would be a virus, but it could be a worm, right? Because I download it to a server and now it permeates the whole organization. And so you really want to have a protected communication vehicle if you need to exchange software over the internet, right? Many places don't allow attachments, don't allow executable files, don't allow JPEGs or pictures. Why? Because they could have a virus attached to it or a worm, depending on what its mean is, right? Okay. Show audit file. Okay. Stop share. Just give me a second because this doesn't always like me. Okay, so this is an audit that was performed, I think 2 years ago, right? And so they looked at what they call a data center, which is actually a closet in the garage at 595, right? Oh, but they looked at how well I'm addressing, or my organization is, some key things. Physical security, right? So there's supposed to always be at least, you talk about dual factor authentication on systems. There's supposed to be segregation of duties. There has to be at least dual access, right? Card swipe plus a key, facial identification, those type of things. Audit doesn't look at the cost. They look at what the current industry trends are. And then have to deal with the budget and have to figure out what I can do reasonably to meet the audit controls, right? So for just about everything, we were pretty good, except we had some issues with file suppression environment. So I'll tell you what happened. So I have fire extinguishers in the server room, or what they call the data center. And the expiration date on fire extinguishers had expired. That's a building and grounds responsibility. But matters not. I was written up for it because should there be a fire, you need a thing that works. It should not be that type of device. It should be a system, right, that envelopes the whole center should there be a fire, because you're talking about electrical and equipment. You want to make sure it's put out immediately, right? But anyways, so now what I end up doing is I have staff keep record of the dates on all the extinguishers and make sure we put in a request to Building and Grounds to get them refilled or to change out and those type of things. Okay. Physical security. I do not manage the keys for any of the facilities. It's handed through our facilities manager, but there was a lack of log. And so the presumption is if there's a lack of log, keys can go missing and they need to be better controlled. So I wrote a procedure for that job function, which again is not mine, to improve on the handling of keys. You need to sign out a key and you need to make sure that it's turned in if you leave, and if not, then the lock must be changed, right? The core point. This one I own. We had missed a disaster recovery test. We'll never miss it again. We had a change of staff. There's no excuse. It puts the organization at risk. And so we immediately did our test. So they also make a recommendation on a range of things. The green means we're good. So you see more green. Orange, we either don't have in place. Oh, this was a great one. Visitor log, right? We're supposed to have a manual log in the room, and nobody should go into the room without being attended. We never let anybody in the room, but I still need a log to prove that should somebody go in the room, that I've signed them in and out. I'm like, okay. Then, again, these are like, physical access. They wanted cameras installed outside the door. Well, that's an expense, right? There is a camera near the door. It just needs to be shifted, right? But you're dealing with an older building and stuff like that. So eventually we got that done. Anyways, I had to write up everything, and it goes to the president's office as well as the board of trustees, what the issues were, what our response plan, and then they come back and audit it and either give us, an okay or a not okay. Once you commit to do something, you have to do it. So this is a real live audit. Since I've been here, I've also been part of other types of audits. This was just a physical of a room, which is really my software upgrades and patterns, and that was part of like the financials audit. They certified these financials, but they also want to look at controls in the various colleges. And so I have to fill in the survey. Based on the response, they pick a few areas to do a test, and then they give you kind of a grade, right? So on that, we tend to get, somewhere in the A- range, never perfect, because it's always something that's changing, and we need to invest and keep those technologies upgraded. I hope you found it interesting. I don't know if there's any questions on this. But again, that's kind of what risk assessment does. Not to be technical, you're going through a prescribed plan. Generally, it's called COBIT. There's an audit plan, right? It's like a recipe card, and you're looking for things. Again, if you understand, it's better. When I was in IT audit, I could read program code. So I could read, whatever the language was. I could do reverse engineering to see what the code was doing. I could come up with independent trial balances, right? You tell me these are your financial statements. Well, I don't want it from your system. I want to use like SQL or Report Writer or a query tool and reproduce from scratch to prove that what you say is your profit and loss isn't vector profit and loss, right? You're not hiding something. So that's, again, what auditors tend to do. Wow, stop snoring. Okay. Back to the slides. Okay. So, how do you safeguard systems, right? Here's just some quick things from the chapter that I thought I would bring together. You use identity management software, right? You want to authenticate. You have password systems. How many here have changed your password on anything in the last 30 days? 1, 2. Oh, Andrew. A few. Most of you do not, right? And the longer you use that password, right? Best practice says you should change it every 90 days. I doubt most people do that. I do, and that's why sometimes I'm like, oh my God, you know, it's a random sequence in my brain. What is it for all my various systems? Many times you use the same password for multiple systems, right? And if there's a data leak, you know, now you're vulnerable. Tokens, you know, so I sign in, I get a, you know, for the use of a minute or two, either digit or a thumbprint that, again, verifies that it's me that is logging into the system. Smart cards, you know, it's like a BUID, but it has intelligence, and so it's the magnetic piece, or it could be, you know, the icon on there. Biometric, right, that's the hottest, and so it's facial recognition, retina recognition, fingerprint, right? Although that's not the greatest because you can chop somebody's finger off and still get into a, you know, a facility. Two-factor is the minimum on critical systems, right? You have 2 ways to authenticate. Firewall is an appliance, right? It's a piece of hardware, it's electronics. And you parameterize it, that's a key word for this, where you set values of what you're going to allow in and what you're going to allow out, right? And you do thresholds too. And so if I've combined it with other systems, I can get early warnings when patterns change. I know I get an alarm when my firewall is getting unusual activity, right? Could be a botnet, could be an attempt to do a denial of service attack, right? Could be, you know, somebody just doing a sniffing, but that volume is up. They're looking for a break. So our firewall, you set switches, software to allow certain things in and out. You may also, in the firewall, determine which IP address range you're allowing, which you're not, right? And so if you're in China, right, they have the Great Firewall, and they allow, you know, certain sites to be accessed and certain sites not to, and some of which you can do through a VPN, so it looks like you have a private tunnel into BU and you're on the BU campus, but it's getting smarter and smarter, and they can tell, right? So again, some sites are still prohibited, like, you know, Facebook and some of the Google stuff. So generally, best practice says you don't have one firewall, you have many. So here at BU, there's a firewall, we call it the edge, right? The doorway, the knock onto getting into BU, right? You can't come to questrom before you go through BU. So there's a firewall there. Then there's one in questrom, and then generally there's going to be one on various servers so that you're protected in depth, right? And you set up the rules. And that's all this picture. LAN is a local area network, right? And so I might put a firewall here to authenticate that when you're in questrom, you're in fact a questrom student and you're authorized to use team rooms and those type of things. I can do it through database controls, or I can do it through appliance. Intrusion detection, right? It's the alarms, right? Now, with machine learning, it's not just setting off an alarm, it's predicting, but it also can like do some preventative measures, right? I'm seeing a pattern and I dynamically change those settings on the firewall to prevent any further penetration. You guys all know about antivirus and antispyware software. We talked about it, right? You want to protect your computer, and so you subscribe to a service that constantly checks. It's not 100%, right? There's always a way in, and that's why the Department of Homeland Security sends out bulletins. There's always these potential breaches, and it also occurs on your smartphone and those type of things, right? Unified threat management, all that is a fancy term for you have a policy that brings together many of these independent devices or software like firewalls, like intrusion detection, like antivirus together, right? So it's defense in depth is what they say. We talked a little bit about this, that if you were on Comcast years ago, they had static IP address, and oh, by the way, it was using an older technology called WEP, right? And it became a security issue because Target, several years ago, was breached. And it was found that the encryption was kind of simple. And so WPA2 came out with stronger standards, right? And now there's even a further one, right? So you constantly on your router at home or your connection to the internet should make sure that your firmware is up to date, right? And a lot of times now when you connect to a device, it'll tell you it has weak security. Don't do any financial transactions. Put tape over your camera, right? I mean, think about what you're doing on those weak networks to protect yourself and your identity. Encryption, again, a couple of times this has come up. Basically, it's Morse code, right? I'm going to slice and dice the bits and bytes so that you need to descramble it on both ends, right? Asymmetric means what? Different, so you have different keys. Symmetric means both the sender and the receiver has that same descrambling software. It's that simple. Again, we talked about HTTPS, right? If you see the S in a lock, generally you can feel secure to go and do transactions on that site. If you're doing financial transactions, buying something, you don't see that S, you might not be at the real site. Do not do any financial transactions. Make sure it's always HTTPS. These here are like protocols you have in place to make even additional security, right? So secure hypertext transfer, right? It's really on web page. We know that hypertext or HTML is used as the authoring language, and we want to make sure that that is secure. We don't want somebody to break in and change. You've read in the paper where websites have been hacked into and defaced, right? And so they need to employ some of these technologies. So encryption, again, we talked about it. If both sides have it, it's symmetric. If it's asymmetric, right, you have a decoder and a coder. Generally, you're using a third-party service to provide part of the Morse code deciphering technology, such as Red Hat, right? It provides security certificates that you renew and employ on your products, right? So it's kind of like they develop part of the code, you have some of it on your side, and the end user has, or the receiver has some. But it's a third-party vendor. How many people have heard of Red Hat? Oh, they're big, right? So most of my portfolio uses Red Hat to provide security certificates for just about all of our sites, right? Because my portfolio tends to be Linux-based, which is open source, and so I need a third-party vendor that can help me with those keys in an open environment. Lots of things there. So this is just a picture, right? Again, the way I like to look at it, it's Morse code. You scramble it up as soon as you hit send, and then it descrambles it on the opposite end. The book, again, we bring back the cloud, but now it doesn't matter whether it's infrastructure, platform, or software, right? There's some pros and cons. They say it's more secure according to the author, and I would tend to agree because you're dealing with, Amazon and Google and Microsoft. And so there's a higher investment, but if there's a breach, there's a greater impact, right? But you always want to make sure that before you sign up for any of those, you look at the service level agreement, how you're notified if there's a breach, what's the turnaround time, is there a penalty, right? Do they have, just like I was audited for my physical facility, the server room, you have a similar set of questions that you want response, legal response from the vendor, right? Because if I'm putting your student records out there, which is not just your grades and your transcript, but it might be your health and everything else, I have to make sure that you're protected. All right. So there's lots and lots and lots of terms. You should read the chapter, and when we go to the final exam review, I'll go through the glossary like I did on the first set of chapters and say, here are some areas that you need to focus in on. Some of the words maybe not, but if you develop in the chapter summary anyways, it'll help you. Okay. Stop share. I'm back. You guys from remote can't see me, huh? The camera in here really stinks. Well, there's 3 people in the auditorium, but they can tell you that I really am tall, dark, and handsome, and young. Oh, Daniel, you've seen me in person. Stop lying. But all kidding aside, questions. So you should feel good about your team projects. I actually was quite impressed. A couple of them blew me away. Your attention to additional detail was outstanding. And, I'm not really into, arts and all that other stuff, but some of your choice of templates was really, really creative, and it communicated the right thing. It was professional. And so you should feel like you can use that or the next presentation as one of your portfolio items, right? Everybody always uses core, which is great, but guess what? Everybody uses core. Make yourself stand apart from everybody else, right? But you should feel pleased. I thought the class did a great job. And yes, I made the Lucy chart a little bit easier than I had in previous semesters, but it had nothing to do with being remote. It had to do with where we are in the semester. We used to teach business process mapping in the first month. And that's great because then you have more time, not that people do it early, right? We always wait till the last minute. But one of the frustrations I found from students is that it was being out of the book out of order. So you're going back and forth, right? So I made a conscious decision to go chapter by chapter in order so it's easier to follow. But I was pleased. Nice job. So can we give a silent round of applause to everybody? You guys can use the symbols too. All right, any questions for me? Great. Well, I thank you, and I'm actually crying because this is our last lecture, but we have team presentations starting on Thursday. One group is at 3:30 based on international time issues, our class, and then next week. So, oh, and tomorrow night. Yeah, I gotta keep everything straight. But have a good night. Bye. Chris.
Professor DeFronzo. Can you hear me?
Heard it.
I think everybody heard you.
Oh, great. Well, I have a, I'm sorry. I didn't want him to just like end the meeting and then like, but I have a question for the SQL thing on Khan Academy. How do I show you I'm done with this module? Because like I finished it, but I don't know how where does it say?
I think you get a picture at the end, email me the module that you're trying to do, and I'll show you what it should look like.
Okay. Well, I have like all these checks on the little like box, but like it keeps like not checking my videos, which I watched all of it, but like it only like goes halfway, which I was like, I don't know what's going on with that.
Okay. Just tell me the ones and I'll send you what it should look like, but.
Okay. I will. Thank you.
Bye.
Professor,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor, just making sure, what teams are presenting on Thursday? Is it just 1 through 4?
Yeah, let me look. Just 1 second.
Yep.
There was a little bit of a, I gotta sign back into Question Jules, just give me 1 minute. I think in my email. All right, so teams 1, 3, 4, and 5 are December 1st. Teams 2 and 9 are Wednesday night. And 6, 7, 8, and 10 are December 3rd, but everybody has to turn it in. The one exception is the team that has Luke Brady on. They're doing it at 3:30 now on Thursday.
Wait, today is December 1st, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so 1, 3, and 5 are going on Thursday.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Professor?
Yep.
I just wanted to double check that you're still holding office hours later today.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'll see you then.
Okay. Bye-bye.